Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Inside the Psychopathic Mind podcast. Again, Jason Smith with Carl Giacono. How are you today, Carl?
Hey, Jason, hanging in there. Glad to have Todd with us today.
Yes. So we have our repeating guest, Tod Roy. Again, thank you again for joining us. And
My pleasure.
today, yeah, thank you. And what we're going to talk about today is someone who was in the news probably in the early 2000s. Andrea Yates. She murdered her five children in on June 20th, 2020. I'm sorry, 2001 was when she committed the crime. So we're going to talk a little bit about her. And she's an interesting case, and I'll let Carl kind of talk about why this is an important case that we need to for people, our viewers and our listeners to be aware of.
Yeah, Todd, I'm so glad you brought this case to our attention as a suggestion to go over it because it has great educational value in a couple areas, despite how tragic. Whenever we review cases and look at stuff that involves children, there's an added dimension for me always of the tragedy of the situation. And this is type of a case where there's mainly victims and not so many perpetrators. So the educative value, I thought, when you mentioned this, had to do with, one, always to emphasize, we can't emphasize enough from a mental health issue, the idea of postpartum depression and the role it plays in kind of mental illness and behavior. I mean, this case certainly brought that to the forefront of mental health. And there's as many times as we can remind folks about that and educate them is useful. The second piece is, I think with this particular case, is a little bit of a history or review or a primer of the insanity defense. Because some people may not understand and know that that really has to do with mental state at the time of the offense. There's various rules, laws, or whatever that govern the insanity defense depending on the jurisdiction. But basically, it has some combination of the idea that at the time of the offense, because of the person's mental disease or defect, they were unable to either distinguish the ability to determine right and wrong, or they were unable to conform their behavior to the confines of the law, depending on what jurisdiction. And then the final piece I thought that's helpful is, sometimes when Jason and I talk a lot about psychopathy, and you joined us when we talked about both Ted Bundy and Charles Manson, sometimes we learn about psychopathy by looking at something that isn't that. It's kind of like the Sherlock Holmes case with Silver Blaze, where the key thing is that the dog didn't bark, meaning whoever stole the horse knew the dog. So sometimes we learn by the negative or kind of as contrasting with it. But I thought we could start maybe turning it over, maybe Jason and you, and we'd start with you, Todd. Maybe you guys had some things to say that would be relevant and important regarding her history, and particularly history that reflects why she wasn't psychopathic or why that wouldn't even be a topic we would discuss in this area.
Well, I guess I'll say something. What struck me was that she committed a terrible crime. A normal society would view it as a terrible crime. And of course, the very fact of the commission of that crime, people are going to have a very strong reaction. And in the culture that she grew up in Texas, and she lived in Texas at the time in a particular county, it was a very conservative, religious, and political culture. And the unfortunate thing about it was that she felt that she was guilty. I mean, she confessed to doing it, and she said why? Because she was a terrible mother, that she was fearful that the children themselves would be taken by Satan, so she was relieving them of their life to send them to Jesus or God, so to speak. And she had this religious rationale for what she had done. But from a cultural standpoint, she had committed a horrendous crime similar to, other people and individuals killing multiple people.
Yes.
But it was real obvious when you start looking at her background that she was very different. She grew up in a middle class home. I think her father was a shop teacher, if I recall correctly. She had brothers and sisters, and you had described her when we talked before as a high achiever. She was valedictorian of her class. She was captain of her swimming team. She graduated from high school. She got a 2-year degree in nursing. She went on to the University of Texas and got an RN and became a oncology nurse, working in an oncology ward in the hospital. What came out in terms of her background, though, was a history of depression in
Yes.
her siblings. And I don't know how far I want to go into that, but
Well,
I think
along with her, Todd, along with her depression, didn't she have bulimia?
I didn't see any reference to that.
Oh, okay. I thought I saw a history of an eating disorder, but she seemed to be somewhat of a passive, compliant, overachiever, like you said, valedictorian of the class. So that's not generally what we find in the history of someone that's a cold-blooded psychopath.
Oh, no, not even. And I would say because she was valedictorian, she seemed to wanted to do things well. I don't know if that's overachieving and not to be a valedictorian in and of itself, but she had a very interesting goal-oriented kind of life and her approach to things. And she wanted to do good, apparently, in terms of getting into nursing.
When you see her on the news and TV along with this, you see a lady that's more compliant and looks very depressed. Mm-hmm. I mean, not the kind of people we talk about that are antisocial or psychopathic.
Oh no.
No glibness. There's no performing. I think maybe, Jason, you had some thoughts about that too with her presentation, how it differs from female psychopathy.
The just kind of actually kind of feeling the depressive symptoms when we get with the female psychopaths, it's kind of on the surface, but you could tell, the affect, the issues that she had with multiple suicide attempts, and the depression, and then I guess coupled again with her background and things like that. So you could just tell it's so different than a female psychopath that will say they're depressed and not really show it, while this lady definitely just shows that highly depressed.
So she had actual affect and deeply felt feelings compared to psychopathy with its shallow affect.
Right. In fact, it worked against her in terms of the trial because the prosecution and the defense both knew and had acknowledged that she was mentally ill. But she felt that she needed to be punished for what she had done, which was in keeping with the delusions under which she committed the crimes.
And this fits our pattern of internalizing things rather than acting them out.
That's correct.
So let's set the circumstances of the offense. So she gets through high school, she goes on nursing. How about her marriage and her circumstances, after?
Yeah. Well, she met her husband because he was lived in the same apartment building that she did. And, they associated over time and then they got married. And what was interesting is that I think Randy is the name of her husband. He was pretty much of a be fruitful and multiply Christian orientation. And so, I think they even made a statement when they got married, because both family members attended and everything, that they were going to have a lot of children. The first child came within 3 months of their marriage, or she got pregnant within 3 months. And of course, the first child, she was depressed. She experienced postpartum depression, which over time, with the multiple births, up to 5 children, had segued pretty much into what we call a postpartum psychosis.
Well, parents can relate to the fact, Todd, that if you have problems managing stress and you have a history of depression and you may not have the coping skills for certain things, parenting is one of the most difficult jobs you can take on.
Oh,
and then
goodness.
you're thinking about 5 kids.
And well, almost after another. I think that the oldest was 8 and the youngest was 5 or 6 months. And but throughout this whole pattern, the husband got involved with a religious fundamentalist kind of person who was basically a fire and brimstone, would be the kind of way I would describe him. You're going to go to hell unless you do this and do this and do this. That's, the Christian way, whatever that was interpreted to be. And not only that, with three children, I think what happened was he got a job down in Florida. And so what he did is they closed up their house. He bought a travel trailer, and they moved to Florida and lived in the travel trailer throughout his job there. And then when it was done, after a couple of years, they moved back. By that time, he had hooked up with this religious fundamentalist guy who had a bus that he and his wife and children had lived in and would travel around and preach. So he bought that bus, and the family moved into the bus.
So she has little support. This sounds like the worst situation for someone who has depression and doesn't deal with stress. She's more isolated, no support.
Exactly.
So she's just getting more and more overwhelmed.
Exactly.
I think during a couple of the different pregnancies, she was hospitalized. She attempted suicide. And she wouldn't take her medications. And she wouldn't take her medications when she was pregnant. So obviously then the depression then would continue. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just a tragic case when you think about it in terms of the influences that varied upon her. And
a personality like this, Todd, is not someone who's very assertive. So you think about sometimes part of depression, in addition to the biology, would be in someone who has a lot of anger and resentment about things, but turns it inwards rather than outwards. Mm-hmm. An antisocial psychopathic person, they embrace the anger and they go out and do harm to other people.
Exactly. She internalized everything.
See?
The sense of control. I mean, the religious orientation of her husband was that, women are in the home and raise the children, and that's about it. And of course, that's why they have many children, to keep them busy, as I suppose, on some level. But they think they're doing God's work by populating the.
You think that dynamically too, the idea with an eating disorder, particularly bulimia, besides that it's an addiction, what are they trying to get out? So here's a woman that's kind of passive and is not very assertive, and she would have a history of an eating disorder like that. She was just not able to express or deal with the overwhelming stress and circumstances that was created in that family.
Well, there was another element of stress that she was experiencing, and that was her father's Alzheimer's disease, and she became the caretaker for him, in addition to her children, in addition to her husband. This is a woman who had a very giving personality, I think. She wanted to do good, and she saw herself doing well and doing good regarding her others. And then through her depression and through her stress and through the admonitions that she was receiving from her husband, as well as this religious figure, she started to feel like she was not doing well at all in respect to religious expectations and individual expectations, because she began to doubt her ability to be a good mother.
So somewhere along the line, her inability to express things and deal with them and get support, she develops symptoms of hallucinations, delusions. What exactly were her symptoms? Was she hearing voices?
Yes, she was. She did talk about hearing voices. I think she even went through a rehearsal with the children about 3 months before the actual incident in and of itself, and she felt she was being guided by Satan doing that. That's how seriously ill and debilitated she was in terms of self-control and recognizing what she was doing. She felt she was acting as much against the evil forces as she could, but in and of itself, because of that, she was becoming evil herself and believed herself to be evil.
And then, Jason, now we're about time we kind of set the backdrop. Then what actually occurs?
So they were talking to a psychiatrist at this time with the family, and they were, multiple, but she wasn't taking any medications. But one of the psychiatrists was saying that she needed kind of round-the-clock supervision, but her husband decided to give her some leeway, give her some time alone. And then on June 20th, 2001, when she's all home alone, she drowns all 5 of her children. She calls her husband. She then called the police, refusing to say why she needed to be was calling, and then calling her husband Rusty to come home as soon as possible. So they have the trial, and in the first trial, she's found guilty, life imprisonment. But I think Todd's going to talk about Park Dietz issues with that, and then we'll talk about that trial, and then the second trial.
Yeah.
So in the first trial, Todd,
mention that.
Pardon?
You want to talk a little bit about that with Park Dietz?
Okay. Well, this gets kind of complicated, but fascinating at the same time. I got interested in the Hinckley trial, the Hinckley case. And that was, he was found not guilty by reason of insanity. And at that time of the trial, and the outcome really upset the legal profession, and I think social impressions as well, because he was found not guilty by reason of insanity. And it was the standard that they used was the American Law Institute standard for an NGRI plea. Park Dietz, I think this was one of his first big cases that put him on the map, because he was involved in the Hinckley case. And he had, and I've read the transcript, not the transcript, but the trial stuff. And he had a very methodical, factual-based approach in terms of looking at what Hinckley did and how he got to the point where he tried to assassinate Reagan. On the other hand, the defense brought in all these experts and were able to try to describe, what happened. And it's been so many years since I've read it, so I could go back, I guess, and review it. But I was struck by Dietz's ability to break things down in an unemotional manner and follow through and have an opinion that he was sane in his actions and his behavior, which was obviously overturned. The defense prevailed. So there's that component. As a result of that, I wanted to take training with him, and I had the opportunity to do that. And again, I was very impressed about his approach. And it has influenced me in terms of how I would approach these kinds of cases. We get to Andrea Yates, and basically his testimony was sufficient enough, and her behavior and demeanor enough, that she was convicted of murder and sentenced to prison. What came out later was that Dietz was a consultant to the program Law and Order, and it seemingly they had discussed a similar case of matricide, and Dietz confused. Well, what he did is he testified that it was likely that she had seen that show on television. when she hadn't, because it never aired. And when he realized that, he went back to the court and said, "I've made an error." They overturned the guilty plea, and they retried her. And this time she prevailed on a not guilty by reason of insanity. But what was striking, though, and the first conviction they based was central to what Dietz had testified to. Not only this particular instance of seeing a show on television that never aired, but his whole approach in terms of this methodological, fact-based approach, to the point where he made statements that he doesn't really need to speak to a perpetrator if he just has all the facts. And the fact that if he spoke to someone who had committed such a crime, it could bias him in one direction away from, he might get, I guess for lack of a better sense, have some sympathy. So he really wanted to avoid having any emotion involved in terms of his analysis and everything. And of course, it all aligned with, the community's perception of what had happened and everything. And it resulted in the conviction, and then resulted in it being overturned. And finally, the mental health status of Andrea Yates was finally presented in a far more coherent form, or a different form, that led to her not guilty by reason of insanity.
Well, for procedurally, Todd, I don't like the idea of opining about people you haven't interviewed or seen. So I don't like that idea. I think I can sort out my own biases, but I don't know if I would agree with that as a policy.
Well, I don't agree with it, because what was striking is during the course of the trial and in his testimony, he's had no experience in postpartum depression.
Oh, okay.
Much less postpartum psychosis.
Yes. Yeah,
so that was a limitation.
Yes.
He also had deliberately not stopped treating people. Some years before this particular trial. So there were a lot of issues that weren't emphasized, on the defense side when he was being cross-examined.
Well, for the audience, I want to make a point of the idea that you can be mentally ill and still not guilty by reason of insanity.
Yeah.
I mean, just because you have a mental illness doesn't mean you meet the criteria. I can remember a guy in the hospital that he was mentally ill, but he was also psychopathic. And he walks up to a patient, stabs him in the side of the head with a pencil, then puts his hands down his side and said, "Okay, I'm done." The guy had offended him in a group previously that day. So despite the mental illness, this particular offense, he was quite aware of what he was doing. So that's an important consideration. Okay, so we find in this case, she finally again goes to then a mental hospital.
Right. And that's
so
where she is
today, Jason.
So she, 2006, found guilty by reason of insanity for the second trial. So she's currently still institutionalized in a state hospital in Texas, Kerrville State Hospital. In terms of her marriage to her husband, Rusty, he filed for divorce in 2004, granted in 2005. Shortly after that, he started dating Laura Arnold. They married in 2006. So she wasn't even, I don't think the second trial was over by then. They had one son, but they've since divorced since 2015. So, but she's still institutionalized, still getting treatment for it. And it's been, 20 years that she's been institutionalized.
Well, I'm curious about that because, one of the things in some of the state hospitals, when I was in California, you could get out or paroled out of a mental hospital if you no longer represented a danger to yourself or others. why does she continue to be in the hospital? And obviously, I imagine she still needs treatment of some form.
Well, yeah, that there's really not much of her while she's institutionalized. But yeah, you would think 20 years that she would have gotten the treatment. So I would imagine, yeah, still they feel necessary to have treatment while or be institutionalized in the hospital versus out into the community. I don't know if it has to do anything with the type of the crime or possibly the ex. I don't know if there's any uh, extenuating factors with this case.
Well, my guess is that she's probably still quite overcome with guilt as to what she did with her children. And I'd say that because when I was in California, I got a CONRAP. Is that what they do where they release someone? And it was a woman who had killed her children. And boy, I'll tell you, that was one of the hardest cases I've ever had to work through, because of course her husband divorced her. She's now sane. She's in support living and everything else, and she was just obsessed with the fact that she had done harm to her children, and she wanted to go visit their graves. And I couldn't make any recommendations how healthy that would be or not. If she did, she would need some support. She didn't have much in terms of family. It's to do what Andrea did is very similar to what this woman did, and how isolated the woman was after treatment and after being released. And I'm sensing the same thing with Andrea.
Yes.
She's really isolated. I hope that she's able to establish some meaningful relationships in where she is. But
I know, Todd, as a parent, I can't even imagine if something would happen to my son. And you think, and when we talk about these cases, often Jason and I are more empathizing with the victims, the perpetrators of victims who may be children or adolescents or something. I don't know I don't think one ever gets over that. You kind of find a way to live around it the best you can.
Yeah. I don't think they have the ability to separate out what they did because it's such a dramatic thing, and it's such a personal thing.
I don't imagine that's even possible.
Yeah.
Jason. And then in terms of the support, she's 61. I don't know if, family's around anymore. And obviously, so that could be also another, maybe she just doesn't have the support if they were to, and she's maybe 20 years have just become more kind of institutionalized too. That could be a possibility. But I think, the guilt and the shame's probably, especially when she's been treated. And that's probably also be a big factor as well.
Yeah.
So when we describe her background, you see a woman that psychopathy isn't even part of the discussion today when we present this case. In fact, in some of the statutes for kind of looking at insanity, they kind of disregard things that they call behavioral problems, which they mean personality disorders and psychopathy, as excluding the person from meeting the criteria.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
So, Jason, any final? Oh, go ahead, Todd. I'm sorry. Any final things, Jason?
Oh, I think this was an interesting case. Yeah, it's very tragic, but I think it shows us again what psychopathy isn't, and gives our listeners understanding that postpartum depression is a very serious thing. So getting it treated as best as possible, that is something that we recommend.
Yes, so never minimize it.
Yeah, never minimize it. So we'll kind of close out. So thank you again, everyone, for watching and listening. As always, you can like and subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And I hope you enjoy this, and we'll see you next time. Thank you. Thank you, Todd.
Sure enough. Thank you.
Thanks.